Maria was an ordinary woman, living in a small and quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other. She worked at a little cafe on the corner of Main Street, the kind of place where the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the laughter of familiar faces. Every morning she opened the cafe before sunrise, arranging chairs, cleaning tables, and greeting every customer with a warm smile. She was soft-spoken and polite, never raising her voice or arguing with anyone. People liked her, but they didn't think much about her. To them, she was just the simple woman who served coffee. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back neatly, and her life seemed predictable. She lived alone in a small rented room above a bookstore. Every evening after work, she would sit by her window with a cup of tea and watch the street below, where children played and couples walked by. Her life appeared peaceful, almost too simple. But deep inside, Maria carried memories and dreams that no one around her could imagine. Many years ago, when she was a little girl, her father had taught her how to play chess. He wasn't a rich or famous man, just a school teacher who believed that chess could train the mind to think before acting. They would sit for hours in their old wooden house, moving pieces across a worn-out board. Her father would smile and say, "Chess is not just a game, Maria. It's life in miniature. Every move has a meaning." Those words had stayed with her, but when her father passed away suddenly, life forced her to grow up quickly. She had to leave her studies and find work. Over the years, she played chess less and less, hiding that part of herself deep inside her heart. No one in the town knew she could even play. To them, she was just a simple woman with a gentle smile, always helping others, never seeking attention. The cafe where she worked had become her second home. The regular customers liked her because she remembered their orders, listened to their stories, and never complained. Some came just to talk to her, because she had a way of making people feel heard. Yet despite her kindness, there were a few who looked down on her. They saw her simplicity as weakness, her silence as ignorance. They thought she didn't know much about the world. After all, what could a waitress know? Maria never let their words bother her. She had learned long ago that true strength is quiet. When people mocked her or made fun of her clothes, she would just smile and continue her work. Inside, she had the calm of someone who understood life better than most. One evening, after a long and busy day, Maria sat at a table near the window during her short break. The cafe was half empty, the golden light of sunset filling the room. On one of the tables sat a chessboard, left there by some young men who often played after school. She smiled at the sight of it, her mind flashing back to her childhood. She could almost hear her father's voice guiding her through her first moves. Without thinking, she reached out and adjusted a pawn on the board. The feeling of the wooden piece in her hand made her heart warm. It had been years since she had played, but her mind remembered the rhythm, the strategies, the patterns of victory. She quickly placed the pieces back and returned to her duties. She didn't know then that this simple moment would soon lead to something extraordinary, something that would change how everyone saw her forever. The next few days were ordinary again. She served coffee, cleaned tables, and listened to the same old gossip about small-town life. But something in her had quietly awakened. Each night she thought about the chessboard. She found herself replaying old games in her mind, remembering moves her father had taught her, openings, defenses, traps, and escapes. It was as if her mind was sharpening itself again after years of sleep. The town continued to move at its slow pace. People went to work, children went to school, and Maria went about her life unnoticed. Yet destiny was quietly preparing something for her. A moment that would test her patience, intelligence, and dignity. She had no idea that soon, the same cafe where she worked every day would become the stage for an unforgettable lesson in respect. She didn't know that the same people who overlooked her would soon watch her in silence, their laughter replaced by awe. Maria's story wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout. Beneath her simple life was a hidden brilliance, one that was waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And that moment would come sooner than anyone expected. All because of a single game of chess. The next afternoon, the cafe was buzzing with its usual crowd. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and clinking cups. Maria moved gracefully from one table to another, serving customers with her warm, patient smile. For her, it was just another ordinary day. But fate had something very different in mind. At the corner table sat a group of young men, regular customers who liked to spend their evenings talking loudly about sports, business, and things they barely understood. They were full of energy, pride, and a little arrogance. Every day they played chess in the cafe, challenging each other and laughing at every mistake. They called themselves the kings of the board. One of them, a tall man named Leo, was especially proud of his chess skills. He often bragged, "No one in this town can beat me. I've mastered every trick there is." His friends would cheer and agree, partly because they believed him, and partly because they didn't want to challenge his ego. That day, as Maria placed their coffees on the table, Leo looked up with a teasing grin. "Hey Maria," he said, "you ever played chess before?" His tone wasn't friendly. It was mocking, playful, but sharp enough to draw attention. Maria smiled politely. "A little long ago," she replied softly. The group burst out laughing. "Long ago?" Another friend chuckled. "Come on, Maria, don't tell us you can actually play this game. It's not like serving coffee, you know. It needs brains." A few nearby customers looked over, curious. Maria didn't respond. She just smiled again, her calmness almost unsettling in the middle of their laughter. She didn't like conflict, and she never responded to mockery with anger. But Leo wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You know what?" he said. "Let's make it fun. Why don't you play a game with me, just one? Let's see how long you can last." His friends laughed even louder. One of them pulled out his phone and said, "This is going to be good. We'll record it. The waitress versus the champion." Maria hesitated. She looked at their faces, full of amusement, not kindness. They didn't want to play with her. They wanted to laugh at her. Her gentle heart told her to walk away, but something deep inside her, the quiet voice of her father, whispered, "Don't be afraid. Let them see who you are." She took a deep breath and said softly, "All right, I'll play." For a second there was silence. Then the group exploded in laughter again, not out of respect but disbelief. "You're serious?" Leo asked, raising an eyebrow. Maria nodded. "Just one game," she said calmly, her voice steady and kind. The cafe suddenly grew quieter. People began to notice what was happening. Even the old man reading a newspaper in the corner looked up. The regular customers whispered among themselves. "Is Maria really going to play?" One woman asked. "She doesn't even talk much, and now she's playing chess with Leo?" Leo smirked and began setting up the pieces. "All right then," he said. "But don't say I didn't warn you. I'll go easy on you, just to make it fair." Maria simply nodded and sat down across from him. Her hands were calm, her expression unreadable. But in her eyes there was something new, a quiet focus, a deep strength that no one there had ever noticed before. As Leo placed the last piece, one of his friends whispered, "This is going to be hilarious," but Maria didn't hear them. In her mind, she wasn't sitting in a cafe anymore. She was back in her childhood home across the table from her father, who smiled at her and said, "Every move tells a story, Maria. Make yours worth remembering." Leo looked up, confident and proud. "Ladies first," he said mockingly, waving his hand toward the board. Maria smiled faintly. She reached out, touched her first pawn, and moved it forward with calm precision. The laughter around the cafe softened. There was something strange. The way she moved her piece wasn't clumsy or unsure. It was deliberate, practiced. Leo frowned slightly but tried to hide it with a grin. "Well," he said lightly, "that's a bold start." Maria said nothing. She simply looked at the board, and for the first time in that cafe, the so-called kings of the board realized that this simple woman might not be as simple as they thought. The game had just begun. The cafe was unusually quiet. The laughter that had filled the air moments ago faded into whispers. Everyone's eyes were on the small wooden chessboard sitting between Maria and Leo. The soft ticking of the wall clock became the only sound. Even the smell of coffee seemed to fade as curiosity took over the room. Leo leaned forward, a playful smile still resting on his face, though now it looked slightly forced. He had expected Maria to laugh off his challenge, maybe blush and walk away. But here she was, sitting across from him, calm and confident, her fingers resting gently on the edge of the table as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Leo asked, half mocking, half unsure. Maria nodded. You asked me to play? So let's play. Her tone wasn't angry, just steady. So steady that it made Leo hesitate for a second. The crowd leaned in. A few people began filming quietly with their phones, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. The chessboard was ready, pieces neatly aligned, black and white soldiers waiting for battle. Leo played white, confident as always. He made his first move quickly, glancing at his friends for approval. They smirked and nodded, waiting for Maria's turn. Maria studied the board carefully. Her eyes moved from one piece to another, her mind calm and focused. She didn't rush. When she finally moved her pawn, it was slow, deliberate. A move so simple yet so exact that Leo blinked twice. He chuckled. Starting strong, huh? Maria just smiled. It's only the beginning, she said softly. As the game went on, the cafe seemed to forget everything else. Customers who had come in for coffee stayed longer, drawn by the strange energy in the air. Even the cafe owner, Mr. Raymond, stood behind the counter, watching with wide eyes. Move after move, Maria played with grace and patience. She didn't frown, didn't hesitate. Each motion of her hand was calm, as if she could see 10 steps ahead. Leo, on the other hand, started shifting in his seat. His confidence slowly began to fade. At one point, one of his friends whispered, "She's actually good." But Leo ignored him. He leaned in closer, trying to focus. Yet every time he thought he had the advantage, Maria quietly turned the game around with a move that left him puzzled. The people around them started murmuring. "Did you see that?" one man said. "She's playing like a professional." But Maria wasn't playing for attention or victory. Inside her, she felt something different, a mix of peace and purpose. For years, she had hidden her love for this game, tucked it away with the memories of her father. But now, sitting under the cafe lights, she felt him beside her again, his voice whispering softly in her mind. Think. Don't react. The board will always tell the truth. Leo's friends, who had been laughing moments ago, were now silent. Their phones still recording, but their faces had changed. What started as a joke had turned into something else, something they couldn't explain. Maria moved her knight, setting a clever trap. Leo didn't notice it until it was too late. His rook was gone, captured cleanly. He froze for a second, blinking at the board. "Wait, how did you—" He started, but then stopped, realizing he had no answer. Maria looked up and said kindly, "Sometimes the smallest move can change everything." Her words hung in the air. It wasn't arrogance, and it was truth. The cafe, once noisy and full of mockery, now felt like a silent classroom where everyone was learning a quiet lesson. Leo tried to laugh it off. All right. Beginner's luck." He tried to sound confident, but his voice cracked slightly. Maria didn't respond. She just kept playing. Her moves were sharp, smooth, and unshakably confident. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. By now, even passers-by outside the cafe had gathered at the window, peering in. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was something symbolic, a story unfolding before everyone's eyes. A woman they had always overlooked was showing a kind of strength that demanded respect. When Maria leaned back in her chair after her latest move, Leo stared at the board, completely lost. His once proud face was now serious, his hands fidgeting. He looked up at her and smiled awkwardly. "You're pretty good," he admitted. Maria simply nodded, her calm eyes meeting his. "You shouldn't underestimate anyone, Leo," she said softly. "Everyone has something they're good at, even if you don't see it." For a long second, there was no sound. Then someone in the back clapped quietly. Another joined. Within moments, the cafe filled with gentle applause. Not loud, not mocking, real, respectful applause. Maria smiled faintly, her heart full but humble. She didn't play to win attention. She just wanted to remind them, and herself, that quiet people often hold the deepest power. And as she prepared for her next move, everyone in that cafe already knew. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was the beginning of something unforgettable. The cafe was so silent now that you could almost hear the heartbeat of the moment. Cups sat untouched, spoons rested midair, and every eye in the room was fixed on the chessboard. The smell of coffee and cinnamon drifted softly through the air, but nobody noticed. The only thing that mattered now was the game between a humble waitress and a proud young man, whose confidence was quickly fading. Maria sat straight, her calm face glowing under the warm yellow lights. The chessboard before her looked like a battlefield, black and white armies locked in a quiet war. She had just made her move, a subtle yet powerful one. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfect. The kind of move that only a true strategist could make. Leo leaned forward, staring at the board. He frowned, rubbing his chin. Wait, why would she move that piece? He muttered under his breath. He thought he saw an opening, a mistake, something he could use to turn the game around. He quickly made his move, capturing one of her pawns, smirking as if victory was close again. His friends exhaled in relief. That's more like it, one of them whispered. Maria didn't even blink. She quietly placed her fingertips on a knight, paused, and then, with one gentle motion, slid it across the board. The piece landed softly, but the sound felt like thunder. Leo's eyes widened. He looked at the board, then at her, then back again. He had fallen into a trap. The pawn he'd taken was bait, a perfect setup. With her single graceful move, Maria had placed his queen in danger and cornered one of his strongest defenses. The cafe gasped. Someone whispered, "She saw that coming." Leo's hand froze in midair. He didn't want to believe it, but it was true. His so-called easy win was crumbling in front of him. He leaned back slowly, the smirk gone from his face. Maria looked at him quietly, her expression kind but unshakable. "That was unexpected," Leo said, forcing a small laugh. Maria smiled politely. "The first move always tells the story," she replied. Her voice was calm, not proud, not sharp, but it carried a weight that made everyone listen. Leo tried to recover. He moved another piece, trying to shift the board in his favor, but Maria's eyes never left the game. Her fingers moved lightly, almost dancing over the pieces. Each move she made seemed simple, but each one carried a hidden meaning. It was as if she could see the entire game's future, every trap, every turn, every ending. Around them, whispers filled the air. "She's playing like a pro. Where did she learn that? Leo doesn't stand a chance." Maria heard them, but she didn't let their words distract her. Her focus was complete. In her mind, she was no longer in the cafe. She was back at her father's old wooden table, hearing his voice again. "Never rush your move, Maria. Patience wins more than strength." She moved another piece, and just like that, Leo lost his rook. His face went pale. The cafe went silent again. The young men who had come to laugh at her were now leaning in, eyes wide, realizing the truth. The simple woman they had mocked was playing with skill and wisdom that none of them could match. Maria looked up and met Leo's eyes. She gave him a soft smile, not mocking but compassionate. "You play well," she said kindly. "But sometimes it's not about power. It's about understanding." Leo swallowed hard, unsure what to say. For the first time in a long while, he felt small. Not because he was losing a game, but because he realized how wrong he had been. He had judged her without knowing her story. The cafe owner, Mr. Raymond, watched from behind the counter, smiling quietly. He had known Maria for years and seen her kindness, her patience, her dignity. But even he had never imagined this side of her. Maria's next move was quiet but final, a clean, elegant check. Leo stared at the board, unable to move. His king was trapped. The cafe fell into complete silence again. And then, just as gently as she had begun, Maria whispered, "Your move." But there was no move left. Leo looked at the board, then at her. Slowly he exhaled and nodded. "You win," he said softly. Maria smiled faintly and began resetting the pieces. "It's just a game," she said, almost like a teacher. "What matters is how we play, not who wins." Those simple words stayed in everyone's mind long after she stood up and went back to her work. The woman they had mocked minutes ago had just taught them more than any victory ever could, and as she walked behind the counter again, the entire cafe remained silent, not out of shock but out of newfound respect. The first move had changed everything. For a few long seconds after Maria's last move, the cafe stayed frozen, as if time itself had paused. The once loud laughter had vanished. The sound of spoons clinking against cups was gone. All that remained was the quiet hum of disbelief hanging in the air. Leo stared at the board. still trying to understand what had just happened. Just a few minutes ago, he had been the confident player, the king of the board, as his friends liked to call him. Now his confidence was gone, replaced by confusion and a hint of embarrassment. Maria sat quietly across from him, her posture straight but relaxed. She wasn't smiling in pride or victory. She was calm, graceful, almost gentle. The pieces on the chessboard told the whole story. Her strategy had been flawless. Every piece he had underestimated had been part of her plan. Leo looked up at her and whispered, almost to himself, "How did you do that?" Maria smiled faintly. "By thinking before moving," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they cut deep. They weren't meant as an insult. They were a truth, spoken by someone who had learned the value of patience and understanding. One of Leo's friends, who had been recording the game, slowly lowered his phone. "Man, she beat you fair and square," he said quietly, half in awe. The others nodded, their earlier laughter replaced with respect. Maria began to gently rearrange the chess pieces back into their places. "Would you like to play again?" she asked kindly. Leo hesitated, then smiled weakly. "Maybe later," he said. "I think I need to study a bit first." Everyone chuckled, not mockingly, but with warmth this time. The tension had lifted, replaced by admiration. As she cleared the table, a few customers clapped softly. The sound grew, spreading through the cafe. People smiled at her, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The cafe that had once seen her as the simple woman who serves coffee now saw her as something entirely different, a woman with quiet strength and surprising wisdom. Even the cafe owner, Mr. Raymond, stepped forward, grinning. "Maria," he said, "you've been hiding talents from us." Maria laughed lightly, her eyes kind. "Not hiding," she said, "just waiting for the right time to move my first piece." That line, "waiting for the right time to move my first piece," stayed in everyone's mind. It wasn't just about chess anymore. It was about life, about how sometimes the people who seem the quietest, the simplest, the most overlooked, are the ones holding the greatest power, waiting for their moment to shine. Leo, humbled but smiling, stood and extended his hand. "You taught me something today," he said. Maria shook his hand politely. "And what's that?" "That confidence means nothing without respect," he replied. "And that real strength doesn't always need to shout." She nodded approvingly. "That's a good lesson," she said softly. Outside the cafe, the evening sun painted the sky with shades of orange and gold. Through the window, Maria could see the street glowing with light, children laughing, people walking by, unaware that something remarkable had just happened inside. For Maria, it wasn't about winning or proving herself. It was about reminding people, in her quiet way, that every person has a story, a skill, a strength that might not be visible at first glance. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Maria sat alone near the chessboard. The cafe was quiet again. She looked at the board, her fingers tracing one of the pawns, and she smiled softly. Her father's voice echoed in her mind once more. "Chess isn't about being the smartest, Maria. It's about understanding the other person, seeing what they can't see yet." She closed her eyes and whispered, "You were right, Papa." The doorbell chimed as she left the cafe, the cool night air wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. Behind her, the chessboard still sat by the window, pieces perfectly arranged, waiting for the next game. But everyone who had witnessed that match would never forget what they saw that day. A simple woman had walked into a challenge meant to humiliate her, and walked out as the quiet victor who taught a town the meaning of humility, grace, and quiet power. The tables had truly turned. The next morning, the little cafe felt different. The same sunlight filtered through the windows. The same aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. But something had changed. The tables, the walls, even the air carried a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Maria walked in as she always did, early, calm, and smiling. She tied her apron and began her morning routine, arranging pastries, cleaning the counter, setting the chairs. But when the first customers came in, their eyes followed her with something new, admiration. The story of what happened last evening had spread through the town like wildfire. By sunrise, everyone knew about the simple woman who defeated the cafe champion. Some people said she played like a professional. Others said it was just luck. But those who were there knew the truth. It wasn't just a game. It was a moment that changed the way people saw her, and maybe even the way they saw themselves. Leo came in quietly that morning. He wasn't his usual loud, confident self. He walked to the counter and waited while Maria poured his coffee. When she looked up, she smiled as if nothing unusual had happened. "Good morning," she said kindly. Leo nodded, feeling a mix of respect and guilt. "Good morning, Maria," he replied. There was a short silence before he added, "About yesterday, I was out of line. I shouldn't have mocked you like that." Maria's smile didn't fade. "It's all right," she said softly. "Sometimes people laugh because they don't understand. But that's how we learn." Her words hit him harder than any insult could have. They weren't filled with pride or anger, just truth and kindness. And that made them even more powerful. He sat at his usual table, but this time he didn't touch the chessboard. He just watched her move gracefully around the cafe, serving customers and chatting warmly with everyone. For the first time, Leo saw her differently, not as the waitress, but as a woman with quiet confidence and deep intelligence. When his friends came in later, they too were quieter than usual. One of them whispered, "Man, she's amazing. Did you see how calm she was yesterday? Not even once did she look scared." Another nodded. "Yeah, I actually felt embarrassed. We laughed at her for nothing." Maria heard them but pretended not to. She didn't need their apologies. For her, the game was already over. Not on the board, but in life. She had proven her point without ever raising her voice. As the day went on, more people came just to see her. Some asked about the match, others wanted to play with her, but Maria simply smiled and said, "Maybe another day." She didn't play to impress anyone. She played to honor her father, to remind herself that silence can be stronger than words. Later that afternoon, a little girl came up to her. She had watched the game the day before with her father, and was now holding a small notebook. "Miss Maria," the girl said shyly, "will you teach me to play chess?" Maria's heart softened. She knelt down and smiled. "Of course," she said gently. "But first you must learn one rule." "What rule?" the girl asked, eyes wide. Maria pointed to her chest. "Never let anyone make you feel small. Even a pawn," she said, picking up a sugar cube from the table, "can change the whole game if it moves wisely." The girl grinned, nodding eagerly. That tiny moment, unnoticed by most, became one of Maria's favorite memories, because she saw herself in that little girl. By evening, the cafe buzzed again, with soft conversations. People weren't laughing at Maria anymore. They were talking about her composure, her intelligence, her humility. Even Mr. Raymond couldn't stop smiling. "Maria," he said as he refilled a sugar jar, "you've made this cafe famous overnight." Maria chuckled lightly. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I just played a game." Mr. Raymond looked at her, his eyes kind. "Sometimes," he said, "the smallest moments become the biggest stories." When she stepped outside after closing, the evening air was cool, and the stars were just beginning to appear. She looked up at the sky and smiled quietly. Somewhere she felt her father's presence, gentle, proud and warm. "Papa," she whispered, "I finally played again." The wind rustled the trees softly, almost like a response. She walked home under the dim streetlights, her steps slow and peaceful. The same woman who had once been invisible to everyone now walked with a light that no one could ignore. And in every corner of that town, from children learning chess to grown men humbled by wisdom, people began to repeat her words. Even a pawn can change the game. That was the moment of realization, not just for Leo and his friends, but for everyone who had ever underestimated the power of quiet strength. Weeks passed, but the story of that single game never faded. It became part of the town's whispers, retold in cafes, classrooms, and living rooms. Everyone spoke about the simple woman who humbled pride with patience and silence. Yet for Maria, life went on just as before. She still arrived early every morning, served coffee with a smile, and tidied up the cafe after everyone had left. Fame didn't change her. It only made her quieter, more thoughtful. To her, that day had never been about winning. It had been about reminding people what truly matters. Every now and then, someone new would walk into the cafe, point toward the chessboard by the window and ask, "Is it true that you beat Leo?" Maria would just smile and say softly, "We played a good game." She never boasted, never exaggerated, because for her, humility was her greatest victory. Leo often returned to the cafe, but now when he came not as a loud challenger, but as a friend. Sometimes he would bring the chessboard himself and ask Maria for another round. They'd play quietly, without an audience, both laughing softly when one made a mistake. There was no mockery anymore, only respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leo asked her, "Maria, how did you stay so calm that day? Everyone was laughing at you, and yet you didn't even look upset." Maria smiled, her eyes reflecting the warm light of the setting sun. "When you know your value," she said gently, "you don't need to prove it through anger. The board doesn't care who laughs. It only listens to those who think." Leo nodded slowly, her words sinking deep into his heart. That night he wrote those words in his notebook, promising himself never to judge anyone by how they appear. Over time, Maria's story began to inspire others. The little girl she had once promised to teach chess came every weekend, learning not only the moves but also the lessons behind them: patience, respect, and courage. Under Maria's guidance, the girl grew more confident, sharper, stronger. One day, after the girl won her first local chess competition, she ran into the cafe, breathless with excitement. "Miss Maria, I did it, I won." Maria's eyes sparkled with pride. She hugged the girl gently. "I knew you would," she said. "You learned the most important rule: believe in yourself even when no one else does." That moment reminded Maria of her younger self, the little girl who once sat across from her father, nervous but eager. She realized that her father's lessons hadn't just lived through her. They had now passed on to another generation. As the years went by, the cafe remained the same: cozy, warm, always smelling of coffee and freshly baked bread. But one thing was different. The old chessboard by the window had become a quiet symbol. People from all walks of life came to see it, to touch it, to remember the story of the woman who had taught an entire town that strength doesn't always shout, and wisdom doesn't always wear a crown. One night, after closing, Maria sat alone by that same window. The street outside was empty, and the stars shimmered softly above. She looked at the chessboard and smiled, whispering, "It's funny, Papa. One game and they finally saw me." A single tear rolled down her cheek, not of sadness, but of peace. She had spent her whole life blending into the background, yet that one moment had shown the world her true self. She blew out the cafe lights and stepped outside. The air was cool, the moonlight gentle. As she walked home, she felt lighter than ever. She knew the world would forget many things, but not this story. Because what happened that day wasn't just about a game of chess. It was about dignity over pride, wisdom over arrogance, and grace over cruelty. And though people would continue to tell the story for years, of the simple woman who silenced laughter with brilliance, Maria knew it wasn't just her victory. It was a reminder for everyone: never underestimate the quiet ones. They may just be waiting for the right moment to move their first piece. Years passed, and the little cafe on Main Street became more than just a place for coffee. It became a story, a memory, a symbol of quiet strength. Tourists sometimes stopped by just to ask, "Is this where that woman played the famous chess game?" Locals would nod proudly, pointing to the small wooden board sitting by the window, now slightly worn, its edges smooth from the touch of countless hands. Maria still worked there, though her hair had turned silver with time. She moved slower now, but her gentle smile never faded. She had trained a few younger workers who adored her, not only because she was kind, but because she treated everyone equally, whether it was a child buying a pastry or a businessman ordering his third coffee of the day. But every once in a while, when the cafe grew quiet in the afternoon and sunlight poured through the window, Maria would sit down at the chessboard again. She would touch the pieces softly, her eyes distant but peaceful. Sometimes she'd play against herself, one hand moving for white, the other for black, a silent game between who she was and who she had become. One day, the little girl she had once taught, now a young woman named Clara, returned to the cafe. She was wearing a neat blazer, her confidence glowing like morning light. When Maria saw her, her face lit up with joy. "Clara," she said, standing up to hug her. "You've grown so much." Clara laughed. "You taught me well," she said. I just won my first national championship. I wanted you to be the first to know. Tears filled Maria's eyes as she smiled. I always knew you would, she whispered. Clara sat across from her, glancing at the old chessboard. You know, she said softly. Every time I play, I remember what you told me, that even a pawn can change the game. Maria smiled, her voice tender. That's true in chess. And in life. They played one last game together. The cafe was nearly empty. The only sounds were the quiet ticking of the wall clock and the soft tapping of chess pieces. Maria's hands trembled slightly now, but her eyes still carried that sharp, knowing calm. Every move was thoughtful, graceful, the mark of a mind that had lived, loved, and learned deeply. When the game ended, Clara looked at her mentor with admiration. You've changed so many lives without even trying, she said. People talk about that day like it was a miracle. Maria chuckled. It wasn't a miracle, dear. It was a reminder. A reminder of what? Clara asked. Maria looked out the window, her voice barely above a whisper. That true power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. Outside, the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in soft gold and rose. Leo, now older and humbler, walked by the window with his young son. He waved when he saw Maria, and she waved back. He stopped for a moment, showing his boy the cafe. That's the place, he said. That's where I learned my most important lesson. What lesson, Papa? The boy asked. Leo smiled. Never laugh at someone's silence. It might be the sound of them thinking. Maria watched them go, her heart full. She turned back to the chessboard, placing the pieces neatly for the next player. Her eyes softened and a gentle peace filled her. She had lived a simple life. Yes, but it was a life that had changed others quietly, deeply, beautifully. As the cafe lights dimmed and the last customer left, Maria whispered one final time, as though speaking to her father across the years. Papa, I didn't just play the game. I passed it on. And in that moment, as the night settled over the quiet town, the legacy of the simple woman who once moved her first piece lived on. Not on the chessboard, but in the hearts of all who had learned from her. Because sometimes one quiet move can echo for a lifetime.